Now it's official. My name is Steve Nikoloff. I'm the programs manager with the Asheville Museum of History. I want to say thank you for coming out tonight for our History Hour program with Ollie here at UNCA. Before we get going, just a few housekeeping notes. We will have a Q&A session right after Ronnie's done speaking, so please hold on to your questions till the very end. Also, if you have a cell phone, please think about turning down the volume, putting on Do Not Disturb, maybe even turning it off for the next hour. Also, the restrooms are just right outside this room if you need to go to the bathroom anytime during the program. So let's begin. Ronnie Pepper. Ronnie is a native of Henderson County. His wife, Roxana, of 46 years, share 6 grandchildren and 2 children together. Ronnie is a veteran who served his nation in Germany while serving in the U.S. Army. Ronnie is the current chair of the Black History Research Group of Henderson County, working with a committed committee to compile the histories of notable Black citizens in Henderson County, documenting local anthologies of the accomplishments and histories of Henderson County's Black populace. As an involved member of the community, Ronnie works with several agencies and nonprofits, providing support as needed. Ronnie is a member of the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee, the Henderson County Walk of Hall of Fame Committee, the Hendersonville Housing Authority Board, and the 7th Avenue Community Garden Committee. So without further ado, Ronnie Pepper, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're here tonight to hear a story and also look at some facts about the Kingdom of Happy Land. How many of you have ever heard of the Kingdom of Happy Land? Wonderful. Well, guess what? We're going to go in a little bit deeper. I was first introduced to the kingdom, of course, growing up in Henderson County. When you're young, you don't really pay a lot of attention to our elders. We listen to them, but we really don't pay a whole lot of attention. And there were some stories about the Kingdom of Happy Land and going on, but we really didn't pay that much attention. It wasn't until around the year 2000 when we developed a celebration committee. A few of us came together and we wanted to do something for Black History Month in January, February. And we came together and we had a friend of ours, Jo Miller, and she wrote an original play, The Kingdom of Happy Land. And we put it on at the Opportunity House. And we had what we call a taste of African American culture. And it started out where you could come and get a little sample of collard greens and macaroni and cheese and ribs, or even some little bit of chitlins, things like that, while you had an opportunity to see singing, dancing, and an original play. Well, it turned into, instead of a taste, it was a meal. It was a meal. And we put on the Kingdom of Happy Land. And during that time, we talked about how the kingdom originated, the individuals originated in a place in Mississippi. And this was after the Civil War, after emancipation. And those individuals moved from Mississippi all the way across the different states up until they reached North Carolina, South Carolina border, down in Green River. And during that time, after we did the play, I got to thinking, I said, now, wait a minute. Here it was after Emancipation Proclamation. People was free. They were free men. And they came from Mississippi. I said, how in the world was that possible? And I got out my map and I looked and I said, that would have been a tremendous journey with women and children, and especially with the climate the way it was right after the Civil War. And I couldn't imagine individuals, blacks, more than starting out with maybe 50, and the numbers grew with Sadie Patton to almost 150 to 200, traversing all the way across the states to get down to South Carolina. And it wasn't until, on that border, South Carolina, North Carolina, and it wasn't until Suzanne Hale, she came to the library one day and she said, "Ron, you know about the Kingdom of Happy Land? We need to do some work on that." And I said, "Oh, okay, Suzanne, we'll get to it." And it was churning. And she came back. I mean, it seemed like a week, and then another week she'd come. And so we got to work on it. We had got an opportunity to got a grant that we started a website, blackhistories.org, and we started researching. And what we found out that the individuals did not come from Mississippi, but they came from a place called Cross Anchor, South Carolina. But one of the things that was really original about those individuals and about most blacks after emancipation, after freedom, that one of the things that they wanted to do, they wanted to own land because they realized the importance of owning land. And they had seen how their masters had owned land and how they had able to become financially stable and all of the things that they could do for their families and for their communities. And we felt that this was the motivation of those individuals. They wanted to own land. They knew how to work the land because they had been doing it during slavery. They had worked the land, rice, cotton, all kind of things. They were not only individuals that were farmers, but they had skills. And individuals, a lot of times when we read about slavery and individuals that were enslaved, we don't look at the knowledge that they come with. We think that they didn't obtain that knowledge until they got to this country. But when you think about it, that knowledge was already there. They brought it with them. And they helped build the communities that they were enslaved in. They helped build the towns that they were enslaved in. And these individuals, all they wanted to do was have that opportunity to make a living and a life for themselves. And when you think about Kingdom of the Happy Land, these individuals that came and settled, it was something that they remembered. Some of the elders remembered that they brought from the homeland, that they remembered. They had a king and a queen, and they brought in how they remembered how everyone came and they worked together. They used their skills. They used their knowledge in order to benefit everyone that lived in that community. All for one and one for all. But these individuals didn't come from Mississippi, but they came from a place called Cross Anchor. And it was during the time after the Civil War, during Reconstruction. And Reconstruction was a hard time because that was when blacks were given the right that they could vote. They could become, do some things, learn to read and write, and do things that they'd only dream about. But there was also a group that did not want that to happen. They wanted to maintain things the way that they were. And these individuals ran into those barriers, ran into those roadblocks. The individuals that settled and created that Kingdom of the Happy Land. They ran into that. They were leaders in their community. They owned property. They were able to have successful farms. But there was individuals that didn't want this to happen. and they did whatever they could to suppress them, to keep them subdued. There was a thing they called labor contracts after the Civil War, that these individuals could work for a farm, and they had to sign a labor contract. And these labor contracts, they could be, they were hired, and they could be paid anywhere from $50 to maybe $75+ a year. And it was almost like slavery again, because if the person that hired them, if they didn't want to pay them, they could say, hey, you ain't working, your work is not adequate, and they wouldn't be paid. There was even some stipulations that they may not be able to even leave that farm. And these were individuals that, again, were leaders in their community. They were members of church. They were pastors. They were individuals that wanted the rights that everyone else had to vote. And they were voicing that opinion. But again, there were individuals that didn't want it. And some of them feared for their life. And so what did they do? They found a place on the borders of North and South Carolina that they could come and they could develop a place and they could live and they could use their skills and pull all of their resources together so they could purchase property. And that was one of the goals. They wanted to own their own land, but at the same time, they wanted to help their community at that time. And so they settled in Green River on the borders of North and South Carolina. And there were opposition that didn't want them to do that. They put out newspaper articles that called them the Zion Travelers. And these were individuals, blacks, that believed in cannibalism and believed that, you know, they would do what they could to put their name out and to make people believe that these were individuals that weren't to be trusted. But yet they didn't stop there. They continued to move up the winding staircase, the Buncombe County Turnpike. And they probably were able to know about the Buncombe County Turnpike because when they were slaves, this was one of the routes that came to Asheville over to Tennessee, that they could drive the livestock, the master's livestock, sell the extra corn and supplies, and could make money. So they knew of that turnpike. They knew of the individuals that lived there. And we kind of figured out that this is how they were able to know a person by the name of Septra Davis, Colonel Davis, who owned the Davis, I guess what you might call it, a Davis Inn, where individuals that were coming from South Carolina and going to Asheville and Tennessee, they would stop there and they could get a meal, get rest, be able to rest the livestock and make it get some rest until they can move on. But anyway, we have the website here, and it's called the Kingdom of Happy Land. One of the things that they were able to do, we created a website where all the research that we done, that Suzanne and a lot of the other individuals within the research group found the documents of individuals that lived on the Kingdom of Happy Land, the Montgomerys, the Bobos, the Williams, and we put all of that information here so that individuals could come and they could see the real story. They could see the history and the stories that were behind that, the deeds that of the property, the pictures of the maps and such, it's all here. And I'm going to go to the next page. And I hope that you have an opportunity to come and you can look at and research it. Of course, now when you come here, your internet will probably go a little bit faster than this. But actually today it's been a little bit slow. But anyway, it was believed that it was only like about 50 people, and they came from Cross Anchor. And during the Reconstruction, there was a lot of violence that was happening during that time. And we also documented a lot of the court cases where they had the soldiers come in to suppress the KKK and things like, and the violence that was happening. And you had transcripts from court cases where individuals came to testify of what was happening. People that were being abused or acted on. There was an individual that was murdered as well. And it was shortly after that time that these individuals, they went and they sold they sold their pigs, cows at cheap prices, so that way they could get away, because that was the only way that they could. And they came to the Kingdom of Happy Land. They settled that. And I wonder, you probably say, now why in the world would it be, what came up, the Kingdom of the Happy Land? And a lot of times, what we figured it was due to the fact that was something that happened in their motherland in Africa, that some of the elders that remembered what it was like to be in Africa and how the villages all had a king and a queen, and that's how they set it up. And individuals, there were stories that said that they had a part of the land was in South Carolina and part of it was in North Carolina. And the reason being, if they had any problems in South Carolina, they could just step over to North Carolina and be safe, or vice versa. So, and king and the queen, people that kind of rule. And these individuals, when they came, they did all kind of things to raise money. There was the zirconia mines down in Zirconia where the individuals worked. And the money that they made from mining, they put it all together. If they took care of, they did washing, they farmed, they even made elixirs for treating rheumatism and whatnot that they sold as well, and they said that they became well known for that. But anyway, they pooled their money together, and they asked Miss Davis to sell them the property. We even had, we've got documented on the website where they, the time that they bought the property and how much property it was that they bought. And it was from about between 1867, 1870, all the way to about 1900 that this community lived. And I know you're probably wondering, say, well, what in the world, if they had such a wonderful place, what happened to it? Let me ask you a question. How many of you have children? Raise your hand. Look at you. Okay. How many of your children doing the same work that you're doing? Because children, what happens is, when they grow up, they want to seek their own fortune. And farming was a hard task. And maybe they didn't want to do what their parents did. But then you also had technology, because a lot of them made money as right after the Civil War, as people started traveling back again and going up that Buncombe County Turnpike, bringing the wares up. A lot of people may have earned money by helping the mules come up that winding staircase, okay? But at the same time, you had the individuals that were working for the railroad. And once the railroad was established, guess what? It was more efficient to ship things by rail than by wagon. So in a sense, things were changing. The industry, the land was changing. People was changing. New ideas was coming up. Our young people wanted to go where they could get better education. Even though we believe that on the kingdom, they believed in education. They knew that education was a way out for them, something that was restricted during slavery, weren't allowed to learn to read or write. But now they could, and they knew that this was a way that they could better themselves, their families, and their community as well. So this community happened. A lot of times people say, well, what happened to the remnants of it? Are there any houses? Are there any establishments? But if you look around Asheville, if you look around Hendersonville, if you come from a different place, remember what it was when you grew up and how it changed. And the way you want it to be is different from how the world wants it. Individuals that want to build more houses or better shops or things of that nature. So this story is not being told. There's only a few of you that knew about this story. But there's many stories like this that needs to be told. So that way it can be recorded. And you might see the communities in a different light. In a different light. A lot of times we as individuals, we stress upon what we hear. Okay? What is it that you hear in history? When you open up your history book, who tells the story of history? The ones that usually have a lot of the power. And there's not a lot of stories being told about the kingdom, because while they were making the kingdom and making it work, that's where their work was. They didn't have the time to write the stories, to tell what they were doing. They were more busy doing it. And it's our job to go back, to research, to tell these stories, to tell the relationships that were happening between Miss Scepter Davis and the individuals that lived on the kingdom, Luella Montgomery or Robert Montgomery or the Bobos, because they didn't tell the stories. They did the actions. But it's up to us to tell these stories, to keep them alive so that we can really have a better idea of what was happening in the area that we lived in. And that is a story. That's part of the story of the Kingdom of Happy Land. And along with that, we tell about the perspectives, old and new, the children, the story of the land, what is happening to the land now, the journey. We talk about the children of William and Luella Montgomery. And those are the stories that we want to tell. Because as you get deeper, a lot of times people say, well, we heard that the property was bought for taxes, was sold on the courthouse steps. And a lot of times in those stories, there's some truth maybe in the story, but there's more story to the story than we spread out. And what we want to be able to do is allow you to come in and hear those stories, read those stories, so you can have a better idea of what's happening. And just like here in Asheville, there's a lot of stories that's happening that we may not know about, because some of us are not from the area. But it's important that these stories be told and remembered, because it really tells us about who we are and what we do and how we do it. What we found right here was approximately 25 children were raised at the kingdom. There it is. Kingdom of the Happy Land. Now, I'm not one of the best persons to deal with this technology, because I'm a storyteller. But anyway, new opportunities and motivations emerge. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is find out what happened and how it happened. We had a grant to start this website. We also, part of the grant was that we hired an archaeologist that came in and they did a dig on one of the last places on that property that was there. And the things that she was able to find and substantiate, buttons and nails and things that were from the 1800s. And we're going to do a program about that, what we're going to call Meet the Archaeologists, so people can come in and hear the stories and find out even more about it, because it gives us an idea of who we are and what people did to live. And a lot of times we read the stories and we hear about them, but one thing that we also have to do is we have to close our minds and try to imagine what it was like doing 1867, 68, 69. We have to imagine what it was like. And the only way that you can imagine is to hear the stories. It's easy for us to say, oh, this is what it was like. And we look out at that piece of property the way we would see it today. But we have to imagine what it was like then. We have to imagine what the people were like. We have to imagine what work was like. We have to imagine what the environment was like for these individuals. But yet, even though they had barriers, even though they had things that were trying to pull them down, they had the vision of better, wanting to do better for themselves and for their community. See, I'm not even paying attention to this, guys. I'm keeping it going. And so right now, I've been talking for about 30, 35 minutes. And at this time, I want to open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
How much property did they buy?
Well, on here, let me see. If I'm not mistaken, it was anywhere between 170 and 200 acres. Suzanne?
Yeah, it was 70 acres in
South Carolina.
And I think 130 in North Carolina. So the Queen owned the part in South Carolina and the King owned the part in North Carolina.
And see, that also lets you know, a lot of times, we think of men having the control. But here we had a lady, a woman, that had divided between both of them. Okay? So what does that speak to you? Okay? Speaks a lot. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Before you speak, let me give you the mic so folks on Zoom can hear your question.
I was just wondering what's going on there now.
Well, right now it's privately owned, and the owner right now is wanting to sell it. It's up for sale. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Are there known descendants from the kingdom that are still in the area that you're aware of?
Well, that is one of the things that we are researching because you got to realize most of the people came from Cross Anchor, South Carolina. And then I think once what happened was as things got better, it's just like us. We want to go back home to our communities. Now, there were probably some that stayed. And if I'm not mistaken, we're researching, I think we want to find out more about the Bobos, the Williams, to see there were, I think there was one Williams that lived in Hendersonville for right now, but we still haven't, substantiated that, okay? But more likely, most people wanted to move back home because if you remember, they kind of ran off. They were kind of forced out. And when things get better, people always want to go back home. Just like, what was it? There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
A lot of them moved other places.
Tennessee.
Up north in Michigan,
Yep.
California. The families really, during the Great Migration, people left Hendersonville and just all over the country.
And if you hadn't had a chance, The Warmth of Other Suns, that's a good book to read. And it talks about the migrations of blacks, the great migration of blacks during that period of time from Florida all the way up, Tennessee, North Carolina, how they moved up because they wanted to move to a better place, better opportunity. Some of them, again, moved out to California. And people always want to move where they can do better, not only for themselves, but for their families.
I read the book Happy Land,
Yes.
and I heard the author speak at Malaprops. It was amazing. So I know about the stories that you're referring to. I wanted to say that I've been attending a book club through the sorority of Delta House, Delta Alpha Kappa, I think I have that right. And the book that's being chosen, the next book being chosen, is her second book. And this book club is open to anyone that wants to attend. So you just look at Delta, I don't know, I'm trying to find it on my phone so I can be more specific about it. Amazing story. So when you talk about the Luella and Robert, and I'm picturing them because the book was done so well with so many details.
I find it interesting that it's called a kingdom and it had a king and queen. What was the governance of the community like, and how did they decide who the king and queen would be, and what were their roles in the community?
Well, see, this is one of the things that we can only imagine, okay? Because, like you said, there was no documentation or anything like that. And if you think about it, if you look at history, especially in our black community and whatnot, there is, there's some documentations and books written, but it's not something that is being pushed. And like something like this, it's only when somebody takes an interest in it and they see the importance of it and they go out to try to push it more. But there's more stories, there's more things that happens. But what we're thinking that happened was the Kingdom of Happy Land, and it was due to the fact of a community in Africa. Because I've been reading stories, and one of the things that I've been doing more about is reading the history of Africa. Africa didn't start with slavery. And a lot of times, I know when I was growing up, that's the only thing that's as far back as I could go. People say, well, what's your ancestry? And it was almost like bow my head, happened with slavery. My families were slaves. But there's more history about Africa, but we don't know that. We only know about the individuals that were taken. There's books out there, but there's no. I've been in college and whatnot. I've not read any history unless I took a Black history course that talked about the history of Africa. And I think with the kingdom is those individuals that, however they decided, listen, let me tell you about what Africa was. It had a king and a queen. Let me tell you about what these people did, because you don't know. You only know because you were taken. But let me tell you back before then. We don't know any of this history. I don't even know what my ancestors' language was. I'd have to do the research and do the DNA to go back to find out where my tribe was, what part of Africa that I came from. And this is not something that was told. But now that people are, you got your DNA, you got ancestry, people are starting to look and say, hey, it just didn't start from slavery. Let's go back. And I think this was the point with the Kingdom of Happy Land. It was a way that they could preserve and pass forward their history and their people, their culture, the importance of coming together as a community. And this is just from my perspective. And I can only say this as I can't speak for all blacks, but I can speak for myself and the conversations I've had with some of my other buddies, and we all believe this, and we think that this is where they come with the kingdom of Happy Land, king and a queen, to pass it forward so you can remember what your ancestors done. It's the same thing that y'all, when we win a trophy and we pass it down. You've got something maybe for your grandfather or your uncle that they thought was important. They pass it down and you start telling stories about it so you can remember who you were and what you were.
I was just wondering, during your research, have you found any of the descendants in hearing direct individual stories, maybe not the whole story, but just a family or anything like that?
Not really. And let me see. Let me go back. What was it? Let's say it was started 1867, 68. And then what is the day of the year? This is 2025. So more likely, if individuals, think about it, they would have had to tell the story and pass it on, okay? And a lot of times, how many of you ever read, of the project that happened during the Depression, where they had individuals go to individuals that were doing emancipation, it was free, and they start recording them, and they recording what they remember about slavery or remember, and they wrote the books, they wrote little stories and told those things. A lot of times those individuals, they were 6, 7, 8, 9, some of them were a little older, but they remembered those stories. They had to pass them on. But even then, people didn't talk about it. And what it was, and one reason is, has anybody ever been in an accident? Car accident. Remember? You remember the accident? Remember the first time that you went back by that same accident? What was it like? Traumatic, because it was almost like flip back, flip up. You would go back, it's almost like remembering it again. Now somebody could slap you in the face and it wouldn't register like that emotional trauma. And sometimes remembering slavery, they don't want to talk about it because it was almost like reliving it again, okay? My grandmother, she never talked about things that happened when she was younger. She always talked about the good things. It wasn't until that she got to an age of, in her 80s, that she started remembering some of the stories or telling us. But she didn't tell us when we were young. She almost wanted to wait until we were able to hear the stories. And I believe that it was the same way with the Kingdom of Happy Land. There were stories that they could tell, but they didn't pass it on. They didn't see the importance of it. I mean, they may have seen the importance, but they didn't tell it again. And I'm gonna share this with you. And I can share this with my family. They never told about the things that happened to them during segregation. Places that they couldn't go. We didn't talk about those things. And I think one of the reasons that they didn't want to poison me to make me feel a certain way. They didn't want to pass that on, okay? They wanted me to know what reality was, but they didn't want to pass on and that's just for me, my standpoint. And I feel the same way about the kingdom. And I wish we could think how important it is to tell these stories, because once these individuals are gone, it's lost. And these are things that we need to know about. How can we change the future if we don't remember what's happened in the past? Yes?
The belief that the folks who came to the kingdom were from Mississippi, and that was later discovered not to be the case. How did that story of Mississippi develop, and how did you discover, or how did someone discover that that wasn't accurate, but folks had come from South Carolina?
I'm gonna just give you my perception of it. Me and Miss Suzanne, we talk, and I think sometimes we on the same line, and then sometimes we say, well, I don't know, maybe a little bit this. And this is why it's great about this. But we figure that, and once you, oh man, I wish I could find that place. What was it? The Design Travelers, because it was talking about how they were cannibals and things like that, you know. And so if they came up from Cross Anchor, and these individuals wanting them to stay, wanting them to be labor contracts, wanting them to remain where they were, and they moved someplace else, then if they were to go looking for them, or, you know, whether they were KKK or whatever, if they went someplace and said, oh, we're from Mississippi, you know, oh, well, we ain't gonna mess with them folk. You know, when they come in, oh, where's those people that over in this? Oh, they from Mississippi. You know, we did find out, didn't we, Suzanne, that one of the Montgomerys did move a family back to Mississippi?
This was one of the families that had enslaved the Montgomerys.
Yes.
Moved to Mississippi soon after the Civil War.
And, you know, so it's possible that that Mississippi was on their mind because of that. And so when they got up there, they said, well, we're from Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. And then when you had individuals that came and was listening to the story of the King, Sadie Patton was researching and finding out that, oh yeah, they were from Mississippi, and it got written, you know. Oh, it's from Mississippi. It's almost like gossip, you know what I'm saying? And it's there. And you got to remember during that time frame, people were not maybe trusting. They didn't want to tell the whole story, but they didn't want to tell a whole lie. You know what I'm saying? Because there's people that it's going to affect. So, and once you get it told, it continues on. It's just like there was a story that in one of the cabins up on the Kingdom, that one of the owners that had it, and they were doing some work on one of the chimneys, and it blew up, and there was gold that was found. And individuals packed up that gold and he left. And he didn't come back until he went to New York. And once the gold got gone, he came back. And that's a story that was told. You know, we have those stories all the time. But we figured that's what it was, to kind of throw people off the track. Okay?
We have a question from Zoom,
yes.
Folks. The question is, what does U.S. Census data tell about the area before and after the kingdom existed? Anything helpful?
Well, in the census, one of the things is, and Suzanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the census, they had a lot of the family living in one household in the census. When they looked like the Bobos, talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. There's one, I think it's from the
1880 census, and it lists the names of the Montgomery, some Bobo Whitlocks that were part of the kingdom, and the census taker wrote next to it, all mixed up. So that's written right in the census. More broadly speaking, if you look at the demographics, there were very few African Americans in the mountains at that point in time. And so that they weren't living walking into another community that had the same kind of tradition of slavery and the same kind of relationships between whites and blacks that they'd had in South Carolina. It was literally a new world when they came. It doesn't mean that there wasn't some racism, but it was just a whole different environment.
And so knowing that, and here's another thing about the census, you got to remember, the census is only good as the person is taking it. Because as I looked at my one of my uncles, he was in this. We were looking at his census. It was my uncle Reuben, Ruth, David, James. I found all of them, and then I looked and I said, okay, Reuben and Ruth, they got them both as female. I said, they ain't female. I said, Reuben was a man. So even when you're doing the research, you have to not lock onto it like the Bible, like it's law. But you got to be able to be creative and look for other little pieces that comes in with that as well. And another thing that Suzanne said, like she said, the blacks that were coming from South Carolina, they may not have had the same relationships that blacks had here. So that would have been a little bit of a separate, because those individuals may not have mingled with the blacks that were already living here. I don't know if you see what I'm saying, because they say, wait a minute, how can you guys be talking to these people out here? Let me tell you about, they were treated differently. So they stood off to themselves. They saw themselves as a kingdom, king and queen. Other folks here might have looked and say, those are some strange people. You know what I'm saying? It's just like if somebody new comes in your neighborhood and they do something differently, you say, I don't know about them. They not like us. They strange. They say, park the car in the parking lot. They talk different too. I'm just giving you a little, that's how it is. Yes. So there's a lot of things to be taken into consideration.
So I mentioned about the book earlier, and I noticed you didn't pick up on it, so I'm not sure what that purpose was.
Passage, talk straight out. Just ask me straight out. Because sometimes I'm like a child.
Well, so the book, I'll just say one part of the book.
Yes.
And ask that question. In the book, it says that because they could not buy the land themselves during that time period, that as they had been progressing to find the land that they wanted to settle, they came across the wife of someone who had died in the war, and she and her son were struggling to keep the farm afloat, and she was the person that said that they could have the land, and went through so they worked her land until they were able to buy the land.
Okay. And these things right here, there's nothing documented about that. And with the story, that's a story. People just, when you make a story, you make the assumption that this is how it happened. And it could have happened like that, because Sarepta Davis, she owned the property, and her husband, Colonel Davis, he was already passed, but I don't think he wasn't in the war, was he?
No, he died before.
He died before the war. But they had a thriving, almost like a guest house, before the war. But then after the war, it went down, and once their slaves, they left. So they were struggling. So here came up a group of individuals say, look, we need a place to stay. Listen, we can work your land. They probably bartered and say, look, we can work for you. You pay us. If you look at that property, and I'm just making the assumption of the trees and whatnot, they had to clear that land again to make it farmland. They could probably log it, sell the logs, and they say, listen, we'll do the work for you. How about if we get a little bit of it? And they saved their monies, and they bought it from her. And think, she probably thrived from that, okay? She began to be able to have visitors again. People started coming up. She was able to make a living for herself. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yes.
There was that relationship. We only assume that happened because there's nothing documented about it. There's nobody there that can tell us this is what happened. But by us looking at how they prospered, how she prospered, and what happened between that time, and they ended up buying the property, okay? And, buying the property. So there's got to be a relationship there. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. You mentioned earlier about the rheumatoid
Yes.
ailment salve, and that was in the book too, and that was something that had been an idea of the woman that became the queen, who was Luella. And she said, well, if you're not going to give us money to the men, she didn't say it like this, of course, but, for us to be able to do the things like teach the children and establish things that we needed in the household, if we could make our own money. And so she came up with this remedy that they were able to sell and make money from. And you mentioned that earlier, so I was thinking that maybe we were on the...
Well, think about this. Those were some of the stories that were told. Now, we knew that individuals worked at the zirconia mine. And we want to do a little bit research and find out about the railroad, because we knew that was happening, and they were hiring individuals to work the railroad. We knew that they farmed. We knew that they washed. You know what I'm saying? So they serviced their community to make money. So we knew that they eventually bought the property. So we can make the assumption that they worked and saved their money to buy the property, because we have the bill, we have the documents, the deed, and how much it was sold for. So we knew that happened, but there's no written records that say, what all that they did. But we knew what kind of work that was happening during the area. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am. Oh, wait, right here.
Thanks. I also read Happy Land, and I'll just be a little more blunt. What were your thoughts about the book? Because it's very entertaining, but I don't want to recommend it to anyone if you say, oh, this is not really a true story of what would happen there.
Well, it was a true story. Yeah. It was a true story. It's just from the author's perspective. And the thing about it is, Dolan, Professor Perez, one of the things that she did was she came down, and she worked with Suzanne, both Suzanne and myself. We went down, Suzanne took her down to South Carolina, and she rolled around the area. She was able to see all of this. So it wasn't just something that she picked out of her imagination. She looked at the documents that was here. So it was based on that. But again, and honestly, and I tell you, I think the book, one of the things that the book speaks to me about is how important it is for, especially as in our black community, because we rely a lot on heir property, where if I own property, it's going to go to my heirs if I pass, but things can happen. And there has been so much of our black community, and there's probably been some white community as well, that has lost property because they didn't have, they didn't go through the legal system. They didn't leave a will. They didn't leave a trust. And people are always out there finding ways, a loophole that they can take it. And I thought that was one of the most important things. And when we do a book story, a book study in our community, that's one of the things I will press upon. Do you have a will? Look what happened. This could happen. This property could be taken. And we want to be able to pass that on. But it also speaks to the individuals that came and they bought this property, to me, that none of them did not fight to say, I want this land. There was none of it. We have not found that. No. Think about this, Suzanne. We didn't find out where people within that lived on the kingdom, even though they put in the money, that they said, hey, no, that property, instead of Montgomery, instead of him, it should be ours too. There was nothing like that.
There was at one point, you talked about the being sold on the courthouse steps.
Mm-hmm.
The land was sold on the courthouse steps. It wasn't for back payment of taxes. what happened is that the King Robert Montgomery died. He had taken out a mortgage, and the mortgage needed to be repaid. They sold the land, but the person who bought the land was his brother. And so the land was kept in the community. And so they really, in that sense, they really did fight to keep the land. When the land was finally ultimately sold in 1919, there was no one still living there from the original community, and the last owner of the land, the one who'd bought it from his brother, died, and so the land was sold, and then a trust was set up to benefit his daughter and his wife.
But the point that I was trying to get to, even though if you had 50 people that was on that land, and you had 50 people that put in monies, none of those individuals came up and contested the Montgomerys or Luella and said, hey, this is ours. This belongs to my family. There was none of that. Even though they may have had a right. The thing about it is, it served the purpose what it was supposed to serve. It kept them safe. It kept them where they had a chance to become a community. It kept them so they could be thriving and they could live. And eventually they just went their own way. Today, you'd have probably seen them on Judge Judy or Judge Mathis fighting over that property, or in the Supreme Court.
All right, this is going to be our last question for the evening.
So it was in South Carolina and North Carolina, but was it connected? Was it all connected, the land? And then the other question is, they only had one king and one queen?
Yes. Yeah, it was all connected. If you were to go the Palmetto Trail, is it? Yeah. The Palmetto Trail, which is a trail that goes all the way from here to the coast. If you were to walk that trail, and there's a point where you could probably look to the left and you're looking at South Carolina, you look to the right, there's North Carolina, you're probably looking at the kingdom. Okay?
All right. Actually, I lied. There's one more question. Ronnie, can you tell the folks how they can help commit with your research and the work that you do, and what can they do to help?
Well, one of the things is that I think, sorry, I seem, thank you. One of the things that you could do, we got the website that we got, blackhistories.org. Blackhistories.org. We got a place on there where you can go in and make a donation, because one of the things that we're doing is keeping the history alive. We want to document, and plus we want to share it. We want to do different programs. What we're doing is, my goal, and this is what the vision that I see, is to help people that live in Henderson County look around and see what's valuable in different communities, especially our black communities. A lot of times there's little nuggets that's around that nobody knows about. And we have a perception of how they are because we look on TV or we look on movies and we see what people tell us about people of color or women or, people with different genders. But we can't believe that until we build a relationship. And we look at the truth. We search for the truth. You'll find out there's nothing different. But there's nuggets. There's people that has done great things for our community that we don't know about. And they're not going to stand up on the well and say, look, this is what I did. They're just going to continue going on. And you're doing them a disservice by not acknowledging and not knowing who they are and what they do. And we want to do this for our young people, to let them realize your ancestors did some wonderful things. And it's in you that you can do the same. When you look at other folk, instead of you looking at what you see on the outside, look to see what's on the inside. And that's what we want to do. So go to the website. I think you can go on the Community Foundation on the website, and there's a place where you can donate to the Black Histories We don't have a donation yet, do we, Suzanne? Henderson County. Henderson County, exactly.
If you just get in Black Histories.
Just get in blackhistories.org. There's a place to volunteer and a place to donate.
And I'll do a follow-up email with everybody who attended tonight, include a link to that website, so that'll be there, accessible for you as well. And I think Ronnie's going to pull it up right now.
There's the website. That's our website that we do. So yeah.
No, you're right.
That's all right. I'll pull it up real quick.
Before I say thank you to Ronnie for this great presentation, I do need to talk at you for just a quick minute. I just want to say thank you again for coming out. Without your support, the Asheville Museum of History would not be able to put on these history programs. And also thank you to Ali for hosting us this evening. Next month for February, we do have another great History Hour program. It'll be February 24th on James Fester Miller, brickmason at the turn of the 20th century here in Asheville. It'll be hosted and presented by Ann Callison Stokely. So please come out and support that program as well. We have a question.
Just one quick question. Is there a physical Asheville Museum of History that we can go visit?
Yes, it is in the historic Smith McDowell House on AB Tech's campus. It is now a traditional regional history museum of Western North Carolina. So please come out and check out the permanent exhibits we have in place right now. Thank you again for coming out. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank y'all. Oh, I'm still right here.
Yes, please give an applause to Ronnie Pepper.
That's good. And thank Miss Suzanne too, because I tell you, she's a wealth of information. We go back and forth.